There we go.
Hi. So I'm Kenji. I'm actually a senior developer and not a project manager, thankfully. Uh, I wouldn't be very good at that. And I'm very grateful that we have actually good project managers here. Uh, but I'm one of the senior developers at Cornershop. And I'm here to talk about caching. Um, I Yeah, I think a lot of people know about caching. I'm not going to be talking about Caché, the 2005 film by the Austrian director Michael Haneke, because that's a much more depressing topic than caching. Caching can be complicated, but oh boy, if you've seen it, I'm not going to talk about that. So what is caching? Well, caching is when your computer remembers something for a while so that it doesn't have to think about it. And you do this too. So like when somebody asks you, for instance, what year is it? You usually don't have to check a calendar or pull out your phone to answer it, because usually you just have that in your brain. You just remember it. And sometimes though, you'll get it wrong, like in January or February when the year has just changed. Or less commonly, if you've been spending the last few decades trapped in a board game, that can happen as well, but a lot less often. But that's what caching is basically. It's the same thing. That's why it's, it's the computer remembering something that it like learned at one point that it can pretty much trust isn't going to change. But that does sometimes lead to, it changing without the computer recognizing that. So sometimes, sometimes we're carrying around outdated information in our heads, and so do computers at times. So I'm going to go into a few different types of caching. The one that you're probably the most familiar with is browser caching. I'm sure you've heard about it and probably cleared your browser's cache before. Basically, browsers save a local copy of any external resource that they'd have to download. Well, not any, but many of them. I'm going to go into exactly what they save and don't in a second. But so, if you're viewing a website, probably has like a JPEG or a PNG of their logo on every page. First time you visit the website, your browser downloads that. Next time you visit a page there, it says, oh, logo.png. I already have that. I don't have to download that again. And then if you click the back button and you go back to another page, it's going to use the cached copy of that page because it's going to assume nothing's changed there. So the danger there, obviously, is that users can sometimes end up seeing content that's out of date if you've made changes to your homepage in the time between somebody first views it, they go somewhere else, they click the back button, then they might not see those changes immediately. Or maybe you've updated your logo, but my browser still has the logo cached, so I'm not seeing it in the new colors or something right now. So good caching practices are all about balancing that risk against the benefits of super fast response times, which is a really important thing to have on the internet. So what control do you have over what a browser caches? Well, most of the time you don't really want to try to control it. Usually, ideally, if everything's working well, your host and WordPress and your plugins, they will take care of sort of doing the behind the scenes technical stuff to signal to browsers, oh, you should only cache this for a few minutes, or you shouldn't cache this page at all, that kind of thing. But if you're finding that stuff that shouldn't be cached is getting cached, then, well, one important thing to do is if you're dealing with, like, if you're in the situation I just described where you've replaced your logo, don't just replace that file, because browsers cache stuff based on URLs. So if it sees, your website.org/logo.jpg, then it's not necessarily going to know if you go in and replace logo.jpg. It's actually better to do, logo redesign 2024.jpg, and then the browser will see that URL and say, oh, I haven't seen that before. Let me download that. So that's one thing that occasionally comes up with clients. It's like, you replaced your logo, maybe you've like fixed a typo in your annual report, or something like that. Generally, you're better off uploading those like different versions of a what we call a static file, which is anything like an image or a PDF, something that's not being generated on the server, but just something that's just stored there. So if you're trying to replace those, it's actually better not to replace those files, but to upload them at a different URL, change your links to it, and that'll keep users from seeing old cached versions when they shouldn't. And when necessary, you can reach out to somebody like us to change how change your HTTP headers that your server is sending. This is sort of like a bit of metadata or extra information that your website sends along with a page. When somebody visits your homepage, they request this HTML document from your server. Server sends back a bunch of HTML code, and along with that, sends some information saying how long that should be cached. So there's this cache control header. It has the various what they call directives in it. But for browser caching, one of the most important is this max age. It's measured in seconds. You can tell browsers basically cache this page for up to a year, or don't cache it at all. Cache it for only a minute. That kind of thing, just depending on the sort of content that is there. Also for if you're setting up redirects, pointing one URL to another, you want to be sure that you are appropriately choosing either temporary or permanent redirect statuses. Temporary redirects don't get cached generally, unless you do something extra to allow them to be cached. And permanent redirects do. So something that I like to suggest to clients if they're setting up redirects on their own is to, you make a new redirect and you're not totally sure if you've maybe it's a wildcard redirect. You're trying to point a whole bunch of different URLs to a different version of those URLs. And you're not totally sure if you've done it right. You can set it up as a temporary redirect first, test it out, and then you can make it permanent. And that way, nobody gets stuck with the incorrect version of that redirect. All right, so that pretty much covers browser caching and how we try to address it. Another super common type of caching is CDN caching. CDN is a content delivery network. It's a set of computers that have been optimized to store and serve resources, meaning pages, images, scripts, what have you. Word documents, any kind of file you might have, as quickly as possible. So these the cache of a CDN is actually shared by multiple users. So it CDN sort of notices, oh, people are requesting this page or this logo.jpg. I'm actually going to save this and send it to those, send it to people without even asking the web server about that. I'm going to go into a little more detail about that in a second. It does that extra fast because it's got a bunch of computers in its network and they're generally distributed throughout the globe. So they're if I live in New York, which I do, I'll be communicating with a CDN server that's close to me, and then somebody in Thailand is going to be hitting a different server, even when they're accessing the same URL for the website. CDNs come in a few different flavors, but what we tend to use is a proxy-based CDN like Cloudflare. Cloudflare is a super popular one, and it's one that we use a lot. Proxy just sits between your web server and your end users. All the requests are sent through this other network before they reach your web server or before they talk to your website. And sometimes the network passes those requests on to the website, but sometimes it doesn't, because it knows what the response to from the server would be. Yeah, depending on how you've got your CDN cache configured, it might only be caching static assets like I described, so images like files as opposed to dynamic pages, or it might also cache whole pages too. How does CDN caching work exactly? Well, like I said, instead of everyone in the world communicating with your web server directly, like here, the users in different locations, they're talking to these different machines that are all connected. So we've got, on the left here, we have the end users accessing your website, which is represented by a can of beans. And it's, they have to pass through this gray cloud of data that will one day subsume us all. On the right, instead of going straight to your web server, users get your content from servers that are closer to them. So the little men who carry the web pages through the cloud are not exposed to as many toxic YouTube comments, which is better for their health, and your users get to see your website faster. Another image may be a better illustration. Here, they chose to represent your server as a bunch of loaves of freshly baked bread sitting on a cooling rack. And the CDN servers are hypercubes, and your end users are these little Skype calls, or maybe those are their driver's licenses. But as an illustration, your server is here in California. Somebody in Brazil here asks your CDN for logo high-res 2022 final.jpg. CDN hasn't seen that file before. It talks to the web server sends it back to the CDN. CDN sends it to the person who originally requested it, and then it also distributes it through the CDN network. So after that, now that some of the, that key resource has been distributed through the CDN, if you're in Finland and you ask for, you're asking this website for that same logo file, you're going to actually get it from this nearby server in France. If you're in Australia, you're going to get it from Indonesia. And that's all just going to happen that much faster than it would if they were talking directly to your web server. Here too, the main risk is that users can see out-of-date content. That's generally going to be the case. That's what happens with caching. We want that a little bit. It's a trade-off. But there's this other extra weird risk because the cache is actually used, it's collecting resources that were generated for one person and then sharing them to others. So occasionally, if things are not set up right, you can get in these really weird situations where, like, I log into a site and I see somebody else's shopping cart. or someone, somebody who's not logged into a WordPress site happens to see like the admin bar across the top of the screen for reasons they can't understand. And they, in that situation, they're not actually going to be able to like click to get to the WordPress admin because that is something that you need to have a password to access. They're not going to be able to do any damage, but it does look scary. And it's at best it's confusing. But that is not unlike users seeing the out-of-date content, that's not something you need to expect to ever happen. That's if something like that happens, something is misconfigured, and we need to reconfigure it so that doesn't happen. So yeah, that like whole idea of private content leaking out, it can happen, but it is also always avoidable. So what sort of control do you have as a Cornershop client or a website owner over CDN caching? Well, unlike a browser cache, which just exists on one person's computer, you can actually go in and clear the CDN cache, and you can clear it for specific pages, specific resources. And you can do that by hand, or even better, you can set things up so that like if you edit a page in WordPress, there's a plugin that we generally install these on all our client sites where CDN caching is in effect. There's a plugin that will just see like, oh, they edited the about page. We need to clear the cache for that URL. Those plugins generally are pretty good, but they don't always know, if you publish a new blog post, they might not know that you've got blog posts listed in the sidebar on some other page, and so they may not clear the cache for that page. You may still see like, may take a while for you to start seeing that new blog post there. And that's the kind of situation where you might need to clear the cache manually. And those plugins help with that too, because generally you've got, you log into your site, you've got a little button in your admin bar or somewhere in the WordPress dashboard. You can just click that and clear the CDN cache. Other than that, again, here you can generally hope that WordPress and your plugins and your host settings will just take care of this stuff intelligently. Most of the time, they do a pretty okay job. But if that's not happening, again, we can go in and modify your HTTP headers. There's kind of a different set of headers that get sent, or headers that are that a CDN looks at. So all the headers are sent by the server, and every the CDN, the browser, everything sees those headers, but they don't pay attention to all of them. So CDNs are really looking at something called S max age, which is similar to max age. S stands for shared, and they left out the hyphen to keep things interesting. And then there are other directives like private, which help prevent the stuff that I was talking about earlier, where it's like, this is just I'm just looking at my shopping cart, so that shouldn't be cached for other users. The private directive is what tells the CDN not to show this to other people. Often you'll see something like this where max age is very low. This page will only be cached by a browser for 1 minute, but it's going to be cached by a CDN for I don't remember what this is, but maybe like 24 hours, I think. So this is, again, that's measured in seconds. There's also this vary header, which can be really useful if you've got translations available. You can say, basically vary is saying users whose browsers, because browsers also send headers in their requests to websites, users whose browsers say, I'm only going to accept content in French, they will receive a different set of cached pages than users who say, I only accept content in English. So you can actually just serve the French content to those people, and the CDN won't get it all mixed up. Where like, oh, a French speaker visited this website first, so now everybody's getting the French version of the site. That is not what you want. And yeah, again, redirect types make a difference. And yeah, temporary redirects are not cached, permanent ones are. Also, different types of requests. So generally, if you're viewing a resource, it's going to be a GET request. Those are far more likely to be cached than the results of POST or other requests, like when you're submitting a form. The response you get when you submit a web form should never be cached by a CDN. That would be like not good, because if you're sending data to the website, you need that request to actually hit the web server. It has to go through the CDN, hit the server, you get a response back, and it's a response uniquely tailored to you, saying like, hey, you didn't fill out that email field properly, or this doesn't match the password we have for you. So that's stuff that doesn't, it's no good to cache that. Okay, I'm going to take a little sip of water here. And it is a tradition to have to try to have some jokes in these presentations. So I've done my best here. What would you call a country singer who can respond like really, really, really fast? It's Johnny Cash, naturally. And okay, here's another one. What did the web server say after all traffic to it was routed through a content delivery network? It said, cache rules everything around me. Okay. So we're almost done here. But I need to cover server-side caching, which is we're sort of like moving farther and farther from the end user here with our caching. Browser caching happens, if I'm visiting a website, that happens on my computer, and that cache doesn't go anywhere else. With a CDN, that's a cache that's kind of between me and the website. Server-side caching happens on the server. This is what the inside of a web server looks like. Trust me, I'm a professional. So you've got a bunch of different types of server-side caching that a lot of the platforms that we use for hosting are pretty big on these, because they can really improve performance a lot without needing users to go through a CDN. They tend to like sort of being able to present like a self-contained package, just like this is our hosting, and you've got all the caching you need in it. We still usually set people up with a CDN. But so there's PHP op cache. WordPress is a PHP application. It uses PHP code. When a user visits the URL for a blog post, what's happening on your server is it's reading several hundred PHP files. It's kind of combing through that semi-human readable code, and it's translating that into raw computer instructions. And then it executes those instructions, and that builds an HTML page that it sends back to you. So reading and interpreting those PHP files, it happens very, very quickly, but it's not instantaneous. And so having opcache just sort of stores those instructions for a little while. You can actually sometimes see this. I mean, we as developers sometimes see this if we're editing a PHP file on a website, and it can actually take a minute before the changes to the code that we've just made are actually reflected on the site. but that's generally that's making your website run a lot faster because all the code that's generating those pages, it's stored across many files. Those disk like reading from the hard disk on the server is, compared to sending data at light speed across a network, it's actually like sort of slow. All right, and there is key value caching, which is like it's a very broad term. On WordPress, this is usually referred to as an object cache. The standard key value cache systems are Redis and Memcache. Actually, I think it's pronounced Redis. I'm not sure. Sorry, folks. But they come in kind of different shapes and sizes. Some of them actually use the op cache as a backend. Redis and Memcache, they just store information in RAM. So there's, again, like none of that disk in and out. Super fast to retrieve information. Generally, the stuff that's stored there is like the result of like expensive SQL queries, complex ones where maybe you've got a particular page that has to cross-reference a whole bunch of different categories to display a set of posts to users, and running that database query every time the page is visited is no good. WordPress has there's a system to store that. And also plugins use that a lot to help, with admin interface stuff. If like many thousands of posts are being displayed in one place, they'll store like a simplified version of those posts in the object cache. And related to that, there's transients, which is a feature that's built into WordPress. Basically, this is like a key value cache that dates back to a time when like a proper memory-based key value cache was not super common on the types of web servers that were running WordPress. So this is sort of it's almost like a backup plan in case there's no proper object cache. It'll store things just in the database. If you've got things set up, fully set up to use an object cache, usually transients will actually be stored in the object cache too, and it's just they're doing the same thing. And finally, there's server-side page caching. So full, whole HTML pages being stored either in memory. That would be like there's a system called Varnish that a lot of hosts use that does that. We used to often install a plugin called WP Rocket, which just as somebody visits the homepage, it saves the HTML for the homepage to a file on the disk, and the next time somebody accesses the homepage within a couple of hours, it uses that file instead of like running a bunch of PHP code and doing queries and that kind of thing. So that can generate pages faster. Well, it'll serve pages faster by not generating them. All right. So just to go over, all of these systems are things that they come with our preferred hosts. So both Kinsta and Pantheon, they both got op cache. They've both got Redis available. You do have to pay extra for it. So if you're not using that, then you are relying on the database-based transient system, which in many cases is fine. But if you've got this level of server-side caching is really useful for heavily interactive sites where you've got your users logging in, and therefore WordPress is going to be sending that private cache control directive and telling the CDN not to cache this. So they're, if you've got a bunch of users looking at content that is uniquely targeted to them, you want to look at like server-side caching for just little bits of those pages and little, you have to be sort of like caching at a smaller level than the CDN would. Both offer CDN options. Kinsta is integrated with Cloudflare. Pantheon sort of has their own CDN, which also does a load balancing, which is kind of a whole other thing. It is a bit like a CDN, but the CDN is actually running your code. And then you can also add Cloudflare on top of Pantheon CDN. We usually recommend that. The benefits of caching, I mean, the main one is the obvious one. It just makes things faster, which is super important. We all know from experience that slow websites are frustrating to use. You can really only stare at an empty browser window for so long before you start to give up. Just as a nice looking website makes your organization look good and look professional and look trustworthy, having a website that is not super slow to access, that just feels like it's working reliably, that shows your folks that you're serving, your prospective donors, that kind of thing. It shows them a good face. CDNs also have sort of additional side benefits. They really keep hosting costs down, basically by like you're offloading a lot of the effort of serving a website to the CDN. Your web server itself does not have to handle every request that gets sent to it. So when you get that write-up in the Washington Post or something, you just enjoy the publicity rather than worrying now there are going to be a whole bunch of people trying to access our site. It's going to slow everything down. That's really just the type of situation that a CDN is designed to handle. They can deal with traffic spikes super well. Similarly, they can deal with intentional malicious traffic spikes, like distributed denial of service attacks, people trying to bring down your website just by driving a bunch of traffic to it. When you've got a CDN and it's set up properly, that is basically not an option. CDNs are really designed to make that not possible. There's also if you're using Cloudflare, there's this thing called the Web Application Firewall. They have a million sort of heuristics that they use to look at requests, see if they think that they're malicious. This person is trying to do something bad, or this person is not a person. They are a script running on a sketchy machine somewhere, and they'll just not even let that request reach your web server. They'll stop it at the edge again of the cloud. So wrapping it up with just sort of tips and guidelines for caching. In general, as I've said, caching, it's all about trading off potentially out-of-date information for a fast response that's going to be, is getting some information really quickly better than getting the exactly up-to-date information later. And is that the case? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. So if your site doesn't change very often, then we would, totally recommend using all of those available types of caching. You can configure your server and your CDN to have a very high max age. Images and stuff, often it's recommended to have them cached for up to a year. You're just not, you're not going to be changing those. There's no need to go back and check with the server repeatedly whether that thing has changed. And you can do the same for pages that are not going to change for a really long time. But if your site is all about serving breaking news, then you need to avoid having too much caching. You're going to want to keep the max age really low, like maybe even lower than we saw in that example earlier, where it was, max age was 1 minute. Maybe you want less than that. And you want the S max age for the CDN to be low as well. And yeah, either or you avoid using a CDN for page content completely. And then you're also going to want to make sure that those, if you're using Cloudflare, you've got the Cloudflare plugin installed. If you're on Kinsta, you've got the Kinsta plugin installed that will automatically clear your cache when you're making updates to your site. Now, if something's not working, and so if the changes that you're making to your site are not being seen by your users or your colleagues aren't seeing them, always the first step, because it's super easy, is to try clearing your browser cache. The cache on the computer that's not seeing the new content. That's it's an easy troubleshooting step to take, and if that solves your problem, then that like helps us understand where the problem really is. It's probably in that max age directive, and that needs to be tweaked one way or another. If that doesn't help you, then you can clear your other caches kind of in the reverse order of how I just talked about them. So like starting from caches that are part of the WordPress platform, like page caches or your sort of performance plugins that aren't necessarily strictly cache, like perf matters. And then you clear the caches that are built into your hosting platform, like the Varnish page cache, if you've got that. And then you move on to the CDN. And you want to clear in that order because basically you're making sure that like the data coming out of the server is going to be more fresh as it hits these like outer layers of caching. If you clear from the outside in, then say you clear the CDN cache, but you don't clear a page cache. Somebody makes a request before you get to the page cache. Their request is going to hit the page cache. They're going to get this old version, and it's going to get cached by the CDN again. So yeah, clear your caches from the inside out. And yeah, if you end up finding that you have to do that a lot, talk to us and let us know if there is a it's like, oh, seems like I always have to clear the Varnish cache, and the other ones, clearing them doesn't really seem to make a difference. Any information like that is going to help us troubleshoot the problem. There certainly are odd things that can happen with caching, but it's always a good idea to have some form, and ideally multiple forms of caching, like keeping the load off of your server, keeping users happy by letting them see things fast. Yeah. So that's what I've got. I want to open it up to questions if anybody has them. Yeah. See, there's been some chat going on. Is there anything I should catch up with there?
I think Deontay's been on all over that. So good work, Deontay.
Thanks, Deontay. Yeah, raise your hand if you've got anything. And if not, thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Oh,
Great.
question.
Yeah.
Is when you're recording this, right?
Yes.
Does the chat get recorded as well, or does that get included in there? Or
I don't know. Ira, do you know?
It does not. So I'm happy to quickly copy and paste it and send it to you, Matt. But otherwise, that's it.
that's okay. I copied it, so I
Okay.
think we're good now.
Sweet. Any other questions?
Thank you.
If folks think of things, feel free to email us support at Cornershop Creative. Kenji is one of our primary support developers, so you probably questions will probably come to him anyway. But we've got a great team who can answer any questions about specific scenarios or things you're addressing. But thank you all for listening, and to those who watched the recording, hopefully this is helpful, and look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Thanks, Kenji.
Thanks, everybody.